The Aurora Hotel was a gem in the heart of the city. Anyone who passed through its doors, whether a regular visitor or an unsuspecting traveler, was immediately enveloped in a sense of comfort and elegance. The walls were adorned with period tapestries, and the dark wooden staircases, polished each morning, creaked softly under the footsteps of guests, echoing the whispers of the history contained within those walls. The hotel was a refuge of old-world charm in a city that was rapidly modernizing, and many considered the Aurora an anchor to calmer, simpler times. The hotel's owner, Mr. Walker, was a man who lived for his work. Elegant and reserved, he had a keen eye and a careful way of handling each detail, as if every corner of the hotel were an extension of his own soul. To him, the Aurora was more than a simple business. It was his legacy, the result of decades of dedication and care. In moments of reflection, he would look up at the sturdy ceiling beams and feel that the place was a fortress of his memories, a solid structure symbolizing the stability and continuity of his effort. Beside Mr. Walker stood his trusted manager, Ethan, a man slightly younger but equally dedicated. Ethan had started at the hotel as a simple employee, but his devotion quickly earned him the owner's trust. He knew every inch of that building as well as the back of his hand and felt a special fondness for the place. To Ethan, the Aurora was more than just a job. It was almost a second home, a place he cared for as if it were his own. The relationship between the two men was something rare. Mr. Walker never had children, and although he didn't openly admit it, he saw Ethan as a sort of successor, someone who could, one day, carry the weight and prestige of the hotel on his shoulders. In return, Ethan held deep respect and a quiet, reverent admiration for Mr. Walker. He sensed the loneliness Mr. Walker carried, the burden of maintaining a legacy that seemed to demand all his energy and heart. The Aurora's clientele was varied but somewhat traditional. Some guests were familiar faces in town, businessmen and regular travelers who preferred the comfort and intimate atmosphere of the Aurora over the more modern hotels beginning to appear nearby. Others were occasional tourists, drawn by the welcoming, classic reputation of the hotel. Ethan made it a point to personally greet each guest with a subtle smile and respectful greeting, making each one feel special, as if they were old friends returning home. One spring afternoon, Mr. Walker and Ethan were sitting in the main lobby, watching the sunlight filter through the stained glass windows, gently illuminating the room. Walker, with a distant look, remarked on how the hotel had already lived through so many phases, thrived during difficult times, and kept its essence even as everything around it changed. Ethan noticed the melancholy in his boss's voice and tried to comfort him, assuring him that the Aurora would always find a way to adapt and survive, just as it always had. However, both knew the hotel was no longer in its prime. The decor, once sumptuous, was beginning to show signs of wear. The doors creaked louder, the curtains faded under the weight of the years, and the accommodations required increasingly frequent repairs. Mr. Walker knew the hotel needed urgent renewal, a restructuring that would bring back the shine of its early years. But he also knew that such renovations would require substantial investments, and Aurora's financial reserves were no longer the same. That evening, in his office, Mr. Walker reviewed the accounts with a heavy sigh. Ethan, who entered to bring him a cup of coffee, noticed the look of concern on his boss's face. In an honest conversation, he suggested that perhaps it was time to consider a loan. The idea didn't sit well with Mr. Walker, a proud man who preferred to avoid debt at all costs. But Ethan argued that it might be the only way to restore the hotel to its former glory and attract a new generation of guests. Mr. Walker considered it. He looked at Ethan, seeing in him a firm support and a clear vision of what Aurora could become. Ethan's loyalty was evident, and he felt that if he needed to rely on someone to help him through this delicate phase, that person would be his faithful manager. In the end, the hotel owner yielded to Ethan's advice, and they decided that the next day, they would talk to the local bank manager in search of a loan. Meanwhile, back in his modest room at the rear of the hotel, Ethan reflected on the importance of that place in his life. He recalled the years he had spent there, the sacrifices and joys, and felt overwhelmed by a deep sense of responsibility. He knew the Aurora was his boss's life, and in a way, it was also his. At that moment, he silently vowed to do everything in his power to preserve the hotel's essence, ensuring that it remained as alive as it was in the memories of those who visited it. The decline of the Aurora Hotel was slow but painfully noticeable to those who had known its former glory. With each passing day, the marks of time became more visible, like scars that insisted on showing themselves. Small cracks appeared on the walls, the paint on the doors was peeling in several places, and the chandelier that had once illuminated the lobby with a golden glow now emitted a dim, almost melancholic light. For Mr. Walker, each of these signs was like a silent stab. He would walk the corridors at night, observing the details that desperately needed attention. That luxurious armchair, once the pride of the lounge, was now worn at the edges, and the velvet curtains that had once reflected the elegance of the place were no longer the same. He knew the guests noticed these details, even if few commented on them. Ethan also saw these changes with a heavy heart. He felt the weight of the guests' glances, especially those who had frequented the Aurora for years. They maintained their respect, but he could see in their eyes a certain disappointment, a nostalgia for the hotel that had once been synonymous with class and refinement. In his conversations with Mr. Walker, Ethan suggested ways to minimize the problems, perhaps rearranging the furniture to cover carpet stains or changing the light bulbs to create a warmer ambience. But both men knew these were only temporary solutions, like bandages on a wound that needed a larger intervention. Each month, the flow of guests decreased and maintenance costs only increased. The hotel depended mainly on loyal, traditional guests, those who came out of loyalty, but this flow wasn't enough to keep the hotel at the standards Mr. Walker so cherished. The financial situation was becoming unsustainable, and the bills piled up on the owner's desk, in envelopes he avoided opening. Mr. Walker's pride was his armor, but he knew, deep down, that this armor was becoming too heavy to bear. Ethan, worried, began to insist more and more on the idea of seeking a loan. He tried to approach the subject delicately, always choosing his words carefully to avoid wounding his boss's pride. One afternoon, during a quiet dinner in the hotel's restaurant, Ethan finally decided to speak frankly. He looked at Mr. Walker, noticing the signs of fatigue on his face, and spoke in a firm and respectful voice. "Mr. Walker, you know I have the utmost respect for this hotel and for the work you've built here. But we need to think about a way to save the Aurora. We need an injection of capital, a renovation. We can't ignore this any longer." Mr. Walker sighed, looking away toward the old light fixtures hanging from the ceiling. What Ethan said was true, but the idea of taking on debt to save the hotel felt like a wound to his pride. He felt that the Aurora was an extension of his own identity, something he should sustain on his own, without outside help. But at the same time, he saw a glimmer of hope in Ethan's eyes, a determination he could not ignore. "I understand, Ethan, but taking out a loan, it's almost like admitting I've failed, that I couldn't keep the hotel on my own." His voice was grave, almost a whisper. Ethan, understanding, leaned forward and spoke with even more conviction. "Mr. Walker, you haven't failed. The hotel is what it is today because of all the effort you put into it. But even the best institutions need to adapt, and the Aurora deserves this chance. We deserve it." These words struck something deep within Mr. Walker. He knew that, despite his reluctance, Ethan was right. The Aurora wasn't just his. It also belonged to every employee who dedicated their days to the hotel, to every guest who had stayed there, and, above all, to Ethan, who cared for the place with the same devotion as he did. After a long pause, he finally nodded, with a sad but determined look. "All right, Ethan. Tomorrow we'll go to the bank. Let's see what we can do." The next morning, they both headed to the local bank. It was a modern building, sharply contrasting with the classic architecture of the Aurora. The glass and metal walls reflected the sunlight, as if the building took pride in its modernity, something Mr. Walker looked at with a mixture of envy and disdain. The bank manager, Mr. Brown, received them in his office. A middle-aged man with an austere expression and a cold voice, He watched them carefully as they explained the hotel's situation and their renovation plan. Ethan sensed that Mr. Brown was a numbers man and presented a carefully projected forecast of the profits expected after the renovations, highlighting the cultural and historical value of the Aurora. But Mr. Brown's gaze remained impassive. He saw Mr. Walker's request as a risky investment and made that clear in his response. After a pause that seemed endless, Mr. Brown finally gave his answer, a cold and direct refusal. "I'm sorry, but the bank cannot approve the loan under these conditions. The hotel's situation is delicate, and we don't see sufficient guarantees for a return on the investment." Those words hit Mr. Walker like a blow. He couldn't hide the look of disappointment that washed over his face, and Ethan, by his side, struggled to contain his anger and frustration. Both left the bank in silence, with a bitter sense of helplessness. On the way back, Mr. Walker barely spoke, and Ethan felt a mix of compassion and anger. To him, that refusal was more than just a denial for the hotel. It was a rejection of years of effort and dedication. He looked at Mr. Walker and, in a tone that combined understanding and determination, said, "Mr. Walker, we'll find another way. Do you hear me? We'll save the Aurora, with or without the bank's help." Mr. Walker only nodded, his gaze lost toward the horizon. Deep down, he knew that Ethan was right. But he also knew that without a miracle, the future of the Aurora was in serious jeopardy. After the rejection at the bank, the atmosphere at the Aurora Hotel grew somber. The hallways, once filled with the sounds of footsteps and friendly whispers among guests, now seemed shrouded in a melancholic silence. Mr. Walker spent his afternoons in his office, his eyes lost among papers and numbers that wouldn't add up, and although Ethan tried to keep his spirits up, he felt the weight of their burden growing heavier by the day. The cold response from Mr. Brown, the bank manager, still echoed in both of their minds. "We don't see sufficient guarantees for a return on investment." These words reverberated in every decision Mr. Walker made, as if they were a sentence passed on the hotel he so dearly loved. To him, the bank's refusal was not just a denial of funds, it was a confirmation of the fear he'd tried to ignore for so long, that the Aurora was nearing its end. Ethan, ever loyal and determined, tried in every way to find alternatives. He spoke with suppliers, seeking more flexible arrangements, and even considered using his own savings to help cover the hotel's most urgent expenses. But time was not on their side, and the financial situation was growing more difficult to sustain. One night, as Ethan walked through the hotel's corridors, he noticed that Mr. Walker seemed more distant than usual, as if the light that once shone in his eyes had finally dimmed. Mr. Walker barely slept, spending his nights buried in papers, calculating and recalculating, trying to find a way to keep the hotel afloat. Ethan knew his boss was not just worried about the future of the Aurora. He felt that Mr. Walker was on the verge of a quiet surrender, a bitter acceptance of the failure he had long feared. And then, on a night that seemed like any other, the unexpected happened. A fire, silent and fierce, took hold of one wing of the hotel. The flames advanced quickly, consuming everything in their path: furniture, curtains, carpets, and wooden walls. Thick smoke spread through the corridors, and the crackling of the fire broke the silence of the night, waking Ethan and the few remaining employees still in the hotel. Ethan was the first to notice the disaster. Smelling the acrid smoke, he ran through the corridors, shouting for the few guests and staff still there to evacuate immediately. The fire moved relentlessly, engulfing more and more parts of the hotel as he desperately tried to guide everyone to safety. Amid the chaos, Ethan realized that Mr. Walker had not yet come out. With his heart pounding and without a second thought, he ran back inside, calling out his boss's name. He found Mr. Walker near the office hallway, visibly disoriented and reluctant to leave. Mr. Walker's gaze was filled with a deep sadness, almost resigned, as if the fire represented the inevitable end of something he already knew was falling apart. Ethan, however, held him firmly by the shoulders and pulled him out, convincing him that there was still hope, that the Aurora could still be saved. Outside, as they watched the flames consume the building, Ethan and Mr. Walker remained silent. The firefighters arrived shortly afterward, but the fire had already done irreparable damage. When the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon, what remained of the hotel were only smoldering ruins. For Mr. Walker, the sight of the Aurora in flames was a devastating blow, a cruel symbol of the end of everything he had fought for. The tragedy affected not only the structure of the hotel but also Mr. Walker's spirit. He now faced a brutal reality, a hopeless situation. What remained of the hotel was nothing but rubble and ashes, and he knew he did not have the resources to rebuild it. To him, the fire was like a confirmation of what he had already sensed, that the Aurora, his beloved hotel, was lost. Ethan, on the other hand, refused to accept this reality. He believed the hotel could rise again, that the Aurora could once again be the welcoming refuge it had always been. However, upon seeing the despair in Mr. Walker's face, he began to realize that perhaps this was an impossible dream. Mr. Walker was broken, not only by the flames but by the weight of all the accumulated disappointments, by the battle he had fought against time and decline, and which now seemed finally lost. A few days after the fire, Ethan found Mr. Walker in his office, staring at a pile of documents with a somber expression. They talked about the hotel's future, but Mr. Walker no longer seemed the same. He had lost the spark that had kept him going, as if the devastation of the fire had also burned away his will to fight. In a bitter tone, he confessed to Ethan that he could no longer see any way to rebuild the hotel, that perhaps it was time to accept the end. The financial situation had worsened, and Mr. Walker knew they could no longer rely on the bank for help, especially now. Ethan tried to find words to comfort him, but nothing seemed to ease his boss's suffering. In the days that followed, Mr. Walker became increasingly reserved and distant, and Ethan, worried, felt he was losing the man he admired so much. Then, on a gray morning, the news hit everyone like a blow. Mr. Walker had taken his own life. Ethan found a letter in his office, where the hotel owner said his farewell, leaving the Aurora in the hands of his loyal manager, with a single hope expressed in trembling words, that Ethan would be able to do what he, Mr. Walker, no longer had the strength to accomplish. The pain Ethan felt upon reading that letter was indescribable. He knew how much Mr. Walker loved the Aurora and how hard he had fought to keep it standing. He felt devastated by the loss of his friend and boss, someone he had always seen as a father figure. But along with the pain, something else began to grow within him. A sense of responsibility, a commitment to the legacy Mr. Walker had left him, a silent promise that the Aurora would not end there. Holding the letter in his hands, Ethan made the decision to continue, to find a way to rebuild the hotel, even if it cost him everything he had. In his mind, a feeling of vengeance began to form against the bank and all those who had abandoned Mr. Walker in his time of need. He promised himself that he would make the Aurora rise again, no matter the cost. The grief Ethan felt was immense and dense, like a shadow that refused to leave him, clinging to his chest with cold claws. In the days following Mr. Walker's death, the world around Ethan seemed to have lost its color and sound. The Aurora was empty, now just a ruined structure, echoing an unbearable absence that reverberated through every corner and crack. Without his boss and friend, the hotel seemed to have lost its soul. News of Mr. Walker's death spread quickly through the town. Residents and former guests mourned the loss deeply, and for days, people came to the Aurora to pay their last respects. Condolence letters and flowers arrived constantly, left at the hotel entrance as silent tributes to the impact Mr. Walker had on so many lives. Ethan watched these gestures with a heavy heart, trying to absorb the community's support and the shared grief. But no show of support seemed enough to ease the wound Mr. Walker had left in Ethan. He felt like a soldier without his commander, alone on a devastated battlefield, directionless. Yet, Mr. Walker's farewell letter echoed constantly in his mind, bringing with it an indescribable weight of responsibility and a spark of determination that slowly began to burn stronger within him. "Take care of the Aurora," the letter said. They were simple words, but for Ethan, They carried the weight of a promise he knew he had to honor. Mr. Walker had entrusted him with what he valued most, and although the Aurora was now reduced to rubble, Ethan felt that, somehow, the heart of the hotel was still beating, waiting for a chance to be reborn. Moved by this promise, Ethan began to take small steps. First, he organized a simple ceremony to honor Mr. Walker's memory, inviting employees, friends, and everyone who had been connected to the Aurora over the years. During the ceremony, Ethan spoke about his boss's legacy and the mission that now fell to him, to keep alive the dream and dedication Mr. Walker had cherished so deeply. The emotion in his voice touched everyone present, and in that moment, he realized the commitment he'd made was real and final. In the following days, Ethan began studying the state of the hotel, assessing each piece of damage caused by the fire. Every charred wall, every destroyed inch, was examined with an almost obsessive attention. He wanted to understand the scope of the work ahead, mentally mapping out a plan to bring the Aurora back to life, even without yet knowing how he'd secure the resources. In the midst of this new routine, something unexpected happened. On a cold, gray morning, Ethan received an anonymous letter, a thick and heavy envelope left discreetly at the hotel's door. Opening it, he found a check for a generous amount, enough to begin the reconstruction. Along with the check was a brief but impactful note, so that the Aurora may rise again. I trust you to make it happen. Ethan was surprised and moved by the gesture, but at the same time, a series of questions flooded his mind. Who could the benefactor be? Who cared so much about the Aurora to offer such a substantial amount anonymously? The identity of this mysterious donor became a puzzle Ethan couldn't solve, but he knew the gesture was a vote of confidence. Someone believed in his ability to revive the hotel, someone who shared his respect for Mr. Walker's memory. This unexpected support gave Ethan the push he needed. With the check in hand, he began to plan the reconstruction with a renewed determination. First, he gathered the remaining Aurora employees, those still committed to the hotel, and together, they conducted a thorough inspection of the building. The recovery work would be grueling, but Ethan refused to be discouraged. On the contrary, each new discovery of damage fueled his drive to rebuild the hotel even grander than before, with a vision that honored Mr. Walker's legacy and offered new hope to the community that held the Aurora so dear. Ethan began coordinating the first steps of reconstruction, seeking out specialists to guide the process and architects who understood the historical value of the Aurora. He knew he couldn't just repair the hotel, he needed to bring it back to its former glory, perhaps even make it more magnificent than it once was. In each meeting and each decision, Ethan recalled his conversations with Mr. Walker, the dreams his boss had for the Aurora, and how he, Ethan, now had the responsibility of bringing those dreams to life. Despite his determination, Ethan also felt a growing anger. The memory of the bank manager, Mr. Brown, who had denied the much-needed loan for the hotel, haunted his thoughts. To him, the bank's refusal was one of the factors that contributed to the tragedy and Mr. Walker's death. Deep down, Ethan began to harbor a desire for revenge, a drive to prove to Mr. Brown that he had been wrong, that the Aurora was indeed a valuable investment, and that he, Ethan, would be the one to make it a reality. This blend of emotions, grief, determination, gratitude to the anonymous donor, and anger at the bank, became Ethan's fuel. He was determined to honor Mr. Walker's memory, to rebuild the Aurora, and to make it a symbol of resilience and strength. And as the restoration work began, he set a personal, secret goal, to prove that the Aurora could indeed be great again, and that he, Ethan, would do everything possible to make that dream come true, no matter the obstacles. As the first phase of reconstruction progressed, Ethan felt a transformation within himself. He was no longer just the Aurora's manager, he was now its guardian, the one responsible for keeping alive the spirit of everything Mr. Walker had represented. With the help of the mysterious donor and the support of the remaining employees, Ethan felt that perhaps he was finally on the path to transforming the hotel, not only into what it had been before but into something even more special. And so, with his heart still wounded yet fueled by responsibility and the promise he had made to his boss, Ethan prepared to face the next phase of this journey. The reconstruction had only just begun, but he knew the Aurora would shine again and that, in doing so, he would honor Mr. Walker's memory in the best way possible. The first days of the Aurora Hotel reconstruction were filled with mixed emotions for Ethan. On one hand, he felt hope and renewed purpose from the anonymous donation. On the other, each new layer of debris and damage revealed in the building was a cruel reminder of the long and uncertain road ahead. Ethan knew he was fighting a battle against time, wear, and doubt, but the promise he'd made to Mr. Walker kept him going. The team of architects and engineers Ethan had hired conducted a thorough assessment of the hotel's structure. The news they brought was disheartening. The east wing, where the fire had been most intense, was structurally compromised, and part of the building would need to be demolished and rebuilt from scratch. This information weighed on Ethan like an unexpected burden, as he knew that even partial reconstruction would cost far more than what the anonymous donation could cover. The financial estimates were alarming. The total cost to restore the Aurora would be nearly double the amount he'd received. Ethan spent many sleepless nights trying to devise a plan to raise the necessary funds, meticulously reviewing every line of the budget with the engineers and architects, hoping to find a way to cut costs without compromising the integrity of the project. Bills piled up, and Ethan found himself facing a new wave of frustration. Each small expense, each unforeseen problem, was a constant reminder of the difficulty of his undertaking. Ethan's anguish grew each day as he realized that, even with the generous anonymous help, he was still nowhere near being able to fully restore the hotel as it needed. However, amidst these hardships, a stronger determination seemed to rise within him, like a flame refusing to be extinguished. One of those sleepless nights, Ethan thought once again of Mr. Brown, the bank manager who had denied the loan when Mr. Walker was still alive. He remembered the man's cold, impersonal tone, the way he'd dismissed their funding request as though the Aurora had no value. Ethan felt that rejection had been the beginning of the end for Mr. Walker, the final straw that pushed him over the edge. In his mind, the bank bore some responsibility for the hotel owner's tragic fate, and Mr. Brown, especially, had come to represent all the indifference Ethan despised. The thought that the bank manager had never believed in the Aurora, nor in its importance to the town, haunted Ethan. With each new bill that arrived, with every delay in construction, the image of Mr. Brown became the target of his simmering anger. He thought about how satisfying it would be to prove to that man that the hotel was indeed valuable and that he, Ethan, was capable of doing what Mr. Brown believed to be impossible. With this idea taking root in his mind, Ethan decided he needed to find a way to raise more funds, even without the bank's help. He began reaching out to construction companies and suppliers, attempting to negotiate longer payment terms, offering them exclusive contracts once the hotel reopened. He found himself taking responsibility for every stage of the process, putting his own reputation on the line in every negotiation. Amid these challenges, Ethan's anger did not dissipate. If anything, it grew with each setback. He started forming a secret plan, something that might eventually give him a chance to retaliate for the coldness and disregard Mr. Brown had shown toward the Aurora's history. He knew that revenge and reconstruction could go hand in hand, and this thought became a new source of motivation. The idea of one day being able to show Mr. Brown he was wrong had now become one of Ethan's quiet but powerful goals. As the weeks went by, Ethan encountered a series of new obstacles. There were delays in the delivery of essential materials for the project, which led to further delays and increased labor costs. On an especially difficult afternoon, one of the suppliers canceled their contract, citing the high financial risk, which meant Ethan would have to find another company and renegotiate prices. Each setback felt like a new test of his resilience and patience, and Ethan realized that despite all the adversity, he was becoming even more determined to prove everyone wrong. During a meeting with one of Aurora's longtime clients, Ethan had a risky idea that he believed could help generate cash flow for the restoration. He decided to organize a benefit gala, inviting former guests, local businesspeople, and influential town figures to support the hotel's reconstruction project. Ethan knew the town held a special affection for the Aurora, and perhaps, by sharing his vision of reviving the place, he could find financial support. The idea of the gala began to take shape, and Ethan mobilized all the employees and friends who still believed in the hotel. They sent out personal invitations, launched campaigns on social media, and invited prominent figures who could help. Ethan knew the event was a high-stakes gamble, but he was willing to risk it all to raise the necessary funds. Deep down, he saw the gala as a precursor to something greater. If he could raise enough to continue the work, he would be that much closer to his personal revenge. The reconstruction of the Aurora would be the ultimate response to Mr. Brown and everyone who had doubted him and Mr. Walker. Finally, the night of the benefit gala arrived. Ethan wore a suit that had once belonged to Mr. Walker, a symbolic gesture that gave him strength and brought the former owner's presence into the event. Seeing the hall fill with people, he felt a profound sense of pride and emotion. The event had a special energy, and people seemed to share the desire to see the Aurora come back to life. Throughout the evening, Ethan gave a speech, telling the story of the Aurora and the promise he'd made to Mr. Walker. The response was moving, and many guests contributed generously, driven by their love for the hotel and by Ethan's passion. He felt that, even amid so many difficulties, there was real hope, a tangible possibility that Mr. Walker's dream could become reality. When the night ended and he counted the donations, Ethan realized that the amount raised was not enough to complete the work, but it was a good start. He knew the road ahead would still be arduous, but the feeling of support and solidarity the gala had given him pushed him forward with even more resolve. And in his mind, as he thought about the next steps, Mr. Brown's image still lingered. Ethan felt that once the Aurora was rebuilt and thriving again, he would make sure to remind the bank manager of the role he had played in all this, even if Mr. Brown didn't yet know it. The idea of one day confronting Mr. Brown, not with words but with the Aurora's success, drove him deeply, and he knew that moment would be the culmination of a very well-planned revenge. After the night of the benefit gala, Ethan felt a rare relief, a breath of hope amidst the constant struggles he'd been facing. Although the amount raised was not enough to cover all the costs, the presence of so many people willing to support the rebirth of the Aurora Hotel filled his heart with determination. He knew that, alone, the mission would be impossible, but with the right support he could face any challenge. In the days that followed, Ethan kept in touch with some of the gala's guests, personally thanking them for their contributions and updating them on the project's progress. During one of these conversations, a former hotel guest, Henry Matthews, an influential businessman in town, proposed something unexpected. Henry, who had been a frequent visitor to the Aurora and held fond memories of his time there, offered to help Ethan secure building materials at prices well below the market, thanks to his connections in the industry. For Ethan, Henry's offer was a blessing. With his support, the cost of the project could be significantly reduced. Henry made it clear that his help was not just a favor but a personal investment in the reconstruction of something he considered part of the town's culture. The Aurora was more than a simple hotel. It was a symbol of tradition and shared memories, and Henry wanted to be a part of its resurrection. Ethan and Henry quickly became close allies. Henry not only facilitated access to materials but also helped Ethan make new contacts around town, from engineers to decorators. Together, they mapped out plans to ensure that the Aurora would return even more majestic than before. This alliance gave Ethan a new sense of confidence, and he began to see the dream of reconstruction with fresh perspective, now with less fear of the challenges that lay ahead. Along with Henry, other local business owners began to come forward, offering their skills and knowledge to support the project. One of them was James Howard, a renowned architect who, after hearing the Aurora's story, volunteered to help restore the hotel's original design. James had a modernist vision but deeply respected the Aurora's historical value, ensuring that the hotel's classic essence remained intact. He suggested certain areas be updated to improve safety and durability, but always with touches that honored the past. During James's visits to the hotel, Ethan followed every detail of the architectural decisions, actively participating in design choices and resource allocation. James's presence brought a sense of security to the project, as his expertise and commitment to historical preservation assured that the Aurora would be reborn with all its original charm, but adapted to meet modern needs. Despite this renewed support, Ethan never forgot why it all began. His desire for revenge against Mr. Brown, the bank manager, grew stronger with each passing day, fueled by each new accomplishment and each challenge overcome. With every step towards revitalizing the Aurora, Ethan knew he was getting closer to proving to Mr. Brown that he was wrong, that the hotel was indeed a valuable project, and that Mr. Walker's legacy would live on through its success. The progress of the construction brought new challenges. One day, a safety inspection revealed that the hotel's support structure would need additional reinforcement, representing a significant added expense. Ethan found himself facing yet another financial crossroads. He knew he would need new support to cover the additional costs, or the project could be halted. It was then that Sophie Reynolds, a local journalist and historian who had attended the gala, reached out to Ethan. Fascinated by the Aurora's story and Ethan's determination to honor Mr. Walker's memory, Sophie proposed writing a series of articles on the hotel's reconstruction for the local newspaper. She believed that the Aurora's story would touch the hearts of residents and potentially inspire others to contribute to the revitalization. Sophie's articles began to be published, and soon the story of the Aurora and Ethan spread throughout the town. People were moved by the history of the hotel, the bond between Ethan and Mr. Walker, and the collective effort to save the Aurora. With the publication of the articles, a spontaneous wave of support began to form. Residents sent small donations, local businesses offered labor, and even local artists donated artwork to decorate the hotel, transforming the reconstruction project into a true community initiative. For Ethan, seeing the town rally around the Aurora was deeply moving. He felt that, in a way, he was fulfilling his promise to keep Mr. Walker's legacy alive, and at the same time, the vision of an entire town believing in the hotel's revival only strengthened his desire to prove to Mr. Brown that he'd been wrong to dismiss the project. Ethan couldn't wait for the moment when he could finally confront the bank manager and show him what he, a seemingly ordinary man, had managed to accomplish. The weeks passed, and the progress was visible. With the help of the community, local business owners, and loyal friends, Ethan watched the Aurora take shape once again. The walls were restored, carefully selected furniture filled the spaces, and decorative details were either reclaimed or replaced with pieces of equal beauty and historical value. Ethan worked tirelessly, overseeing every phase of the reconstruction, day and night, without rest. Ethan's efforts and dedication began to attract attention beyond the town. Journalists from other regions started contacting Sophie for interviews, and the story of the Aurora became a symbol of hope and resilience. With national recognition, new donors emerged, and Ethan could finally see the possibility of completing the reconstruction without compromising quality or Mr. Walker's legacy. In the end, Ethan realized that, with each day of progress, the image of Mr. Brown in his mind was becoming less of a shadow and more of a milestone he was about to surpass. Revenge was still a latent motivation, but now, there was something bigger. Ethan wanted the Aurora to represent something meaningful for everyone, not just for him. Above all, he wanted to honor the promise he'd made to Mr. Walker, that the Aurora would rise again, along with everything they had built together over the years. The hotel was nearly ready for reopening, and Ethan knew the moment of reckoning with Mr. Brown was approaching. The Aurora would be more than just a restored hotel. It would be a monument to resilience, a reminder to everyone who had underestimated the power of a promise and a friendship. He was ready to show the world the result of his work and, most importantly, to prove to the bank manager that, even in the face of adversity, he would never give up on fulfilling his promise. The final preparations for the reopening of the Aurora Hotel filled Ethan with a mix of euphoria and nervousness. Every detail was being meticulously reviewed, and the hotel seemed ready to shine once again, as it had in the days when Mr. Walker was still alive. For Ethan, seeing the Aurora reborn was a dream finally coming true after so much sacrifice. The restored walls, the classic furnishings, and the detailed decor made the hotel a place brimming with history, elegance, and, above all, the soul of its former owner. The support Ethan had received from the town was crucial in reaching this point. Friends, former guests, and local business owners had come together to accomplish what had once seemed impossible. With every visit, every compliment on the work done, the promise Ethan had made to Mr. Walker felt increasingly tangible. He knew he was close to fulfilling the mission his boss had entrusted to him, honoring the memory of a man who had always believed in the hotel's value and potential to continue shining. Yet, amid the atmosphere of celebration, a feeling of unease still lingered. Although Ethan was proud of what he had built, he couldn't ignore the anger and frustration he'd held inside ever since Mr. Brown had refused the loan that could have spared Mr. Walker so much pain. The bank manager's cold and calculated rejection seemed to echo with every new accomplishment, reminding Ethan that, to the bank, the Aurora had never been a worthwhile investment. During the nights when he was alone in the hotel, Ethan allowed himself to imagine the moment when he would finally face Mr. Brown. He hadn't seen him since that fateful meeting with Mr. Walker and wondered what Mr. Brown's expression would be when he saw that the hotel had come back to life and that his pessimistic outlook had been completely wrong. For Ethan, revenge wouldn't be in words, it would be in the Aurora's success. He wanted the bank manager to understand just how wrong he had been to underestimate the hotel's resilience and value. As the reopening date approached, the town began to anticipate the event. The story of the Aurora had become an example of perseverance, and many wanted to be there on the day the hotel opened its doors once more. Sophie's articles in the local newspaper continued to attract attention, and now visitors from other regions were expressing interest in experiencing the Aurora's promised charm. On the eve of the grand reopening, Ethan walked the hotel's halls, checking every detail, every corner, and recalling the years he'd spent there alongside Mr. Walker. He was overcome with deep emotion as he thought of his boss, silently thanking him for all the trust and learning he'd been given. Ethan knew that although Mr. Walker wasn't physically present, his spirit, dedication, and love for the hotel were embedded in every brick and decorative piece that comprised the new Aurora. The morning of the event, Ethan woke up early. He donned the formal suit he had worn on the gala night, adjusting his tie with steady hands, feeling that this was the moment to fulfill not only Mr. Walker's dream but also his own, to show the town and everyone who had doubted that the Aurora was still alive. As he walked toward the main hall, his heart beat strongly, and he knew that in just moments he would see Mr. Brown. The Aurora's hall was filled with guests, from longtime patrons to new faces, all sharing a sense of admiration and excitement. Ethan moved through the crowd, greeting everyone with a proud, calm smile. Then, in a corner of the hall, he saw the figure he'd been waiting for, Mr. Brown. The bank manager was there, with an unreadable expression, observing the space with a keen eye. Ethan approached Mr. Brown, greeting him with a firm handshake and a look of determination. For a moment, the two men faced each other in silence, as if each were considering the right words for this meeting, which held significant weight for both. Mr. Brown broke the silence in a low, careful voice. "Congratulations, Ethan. It seems the hotel really did manage to rise again. I didn't think it would be possible." There was a hint of surprise and perhaps even respect in his words. Ethan, however, maintained his composed posture, hiding the whirlwind of emotions he felt. In a calm but meaningful tone, he replied, "Thank you, Mr. Brown. We made it despite everything. This hotel is proof that some dreams are strong enough to survive, even when many doubt." Mr. Brown seemed to consider Ethan's words, turning his gaze to the hall as the guests admired each detail of the space. He was silent for a moment, as if trying to absorb what this event meant, not only for Ethan but for the town and for the hotel's legacy. At the end of their conversation, Mr. Brown made an unexpected gesture. He extended his hand to Ethan and said sincerely, "I admit I was wrong about the Aurora. Sometimes, numbers don't reveal the true value of something. I wish you and the hotel every success." Ethan accepted the gesture with a serious expression, but without any feeling of forgiveness. To him, Mr. Brown's words did not change the past or erase the pain Mr. Walker had suffered. He felt that this was his revenge, silent and powerful, as the success of the Aurora now spoke for itself. Mr. Brown had underestimated the hotel's worth, and now he stood before a revival he never expected to witness. The Aurora's reopening was a triumph. Journalists and critics praised the work, and Ethan's story spread further, turning the Aurora into a symbol of resilience and overcoming adversity. Now, as the hotel's owner, Ethan saw Mr. Walker's dream fulfilled in ways he had never imagined. The revenge he had nurtured throughout the process had finally been achieved, without the need for confrontation or bitter words. The hotel's success itself was the answer he had longed to give. As the hours passed, Ethan felt a peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. He had kept his promise and managed to overcome the challenges that had arisen along the way, transforming pain and anger into something beautiful and lasting. For him, the Aurora was now more than Mr. Walker's legacy. It was his own triumph, a testament to his journey of resilience and renewal. With the reopening of the Aurora Hotel a resounding success, Ethan felt he was finally on the right path. Praise for the hotel's restoration was constant, and both local and national press continued publishing stories about Aurora's revival and the determination of its new owner. The first few months after the grand opening saw a steady flow of new guests, eager to experience the historic hotel, now glowing once more with timeless charm. For Ethan, however, the work was far from over. He knew that reopening Aurora's doors was just the beginning. Maintaining the quality of service and ensuring each guest left satisfied was his priority. He dedicated himself to personally overseeing every aspect of the operation, from reception to room cleanliness. The staff, many of whom were longtime employees of the hotel, felt Ethan's constant presence as a reminder that this new chapter for the Aurora had to be even more impeccable than those that came before. But with the increase in business, new challenges also arose. The hotel needed constant adjustments to handle the growing demand, and Ethan soon realized that certain areas still required improvements. He invested in staff training, aiming to ensure that each employee was equipped to deliver a unique and memorable experience to visitors. Guests spoke highly of the attention to detail and warm hospitality they encountered, and many returned, bringing friends and family, further boosting the hotel's popularity. With this growing success, Ethan began to envision something that had once seemed impossible: the possibility of expansion. He knew the city had an unmet demand for quality accommodations, and now revitalized, the Aurora had become a sought-after destination for tourists and business travelers alike. Ethan started to consider opening a second location or perhaps even transforming the Aurora into a hotel chain, bringing the name and spirit of the hotel to other cities that would appreciate its classic charm. This idea of expansion led him to seek advice from Henry Matthews, his longtime ally in the reconstruction process. During a meeting at one of the city's most elegant restaurants, Ethan shared his ideas with Henry, who listened attentively before offering some strategies. Henry understood that expanding a business like the Aurora would be a complex challenge, but he also saw tremendous potential. "Ethan, you have a story that inspires people. The Aurora is more than just a hotel, it's a symbol of resilience. If you take that spirit to other places, I think you could achieve something even greater. But you'll need to plan every step very carefully. Expansion could be a golden opportunity, but also a trap if it isn't done right." Henry's words made Ethan reflect deeply. He knew that to sustain Aurora's success, he had to ensure that any expansion wouldn't compromise the essence of what they had created together. He decided to start with market research, evaluating nearby cities that could benefit from an Aurora location and trying to understand the preferences and demands of potential guests. The idea of expanding brought new energy to Ethan, but it also stirred old feelings. Some nights, as he reviewed expansion plans in his office at the hotel, he found himself thinking again about Mr. Brown and how, now, Aurora's success seemed further than ever from the bank manager's skeptical predictions. Ethan knew his motivation for moving forward no longer hinged solely on proving something to Mr. Brown, yet the idea that his success served as a direct response to that moment of rejection still fueled him in some way. As the weeks passed, the hotel continued to thrive, and Ethan began attracting the attention of investors interested in collaborating on the expansion. Some were local businesspeople who had fallen in love with the Aurora's story and wanted to be part of the next step. Others were outside investors, drawn by the hotel's growing popularity and the potential to replicate the concept in other tourist towns. Among the proposals he received, Ethan was particularly cautious. He knew he couldn't allow the essence of the Aurora to be diluted into an impersonal, purely commercial business model. He sought advice from Sophie Reynolds, the journalist who had supported the hotel's rebirth, asking her opinion on how to maintain the Aurora's authenticity even in new locations. Sophie suggested that in each new city, Ethan find a way to connect the hotel to local culture, allowing each Aurora location to carry a piece of the area's history while staying rooted in the original. What makes the Aurora special, Ethan, is that it's not just a beautiful building. It carries stories and memories. If you can keep that in every new hotel you open, I think you'll be on the right track. People want more than just a place to sleep. They want to feel part of something bigger. Sophie's suggestion resonated with Ethan. He began considering what each Aurora location could offer uniquely, without straying from the original vision of creating a classic, timeless refuge. He decided that his next step would be to personally visit some potential cities, exploring the idea of opening a second location, always carrying with him the essence of the hotel Mr. Walker had loved so much. With Henry's support, Ethan arranged a series of visits to potential expansion sites. These trips gave him a fresh perspective on the Aurora's growth potential and inspired him to create a detailed business plan, something that could attract serious investors without compromising the principles he and Mr. Walker had always upheld. The idea of expanding Aurora became a new source of excitement, an opportunity to keep the memory of the hotel and its founder alive in new locations. While these visits were happening, Ethan's presence in town was a constant reminder of Aurora's success. And with each bank visit, each business meeting, he noticed that the respect he had once been denied was now freely given. Mr. Brown, who had always maintained an air of superiority, now greeted him with a mix of surprise and admiration. For Ethan, this silent acknowledgement was confirmation that he had made the right choices. However, Ethan carried a secret within himself. He had begun buying shares in the bank where Mr. Brown still held a position of influence. It was a plan he had been building quietly, using Aurora's growing profits to acquire small amounts of stock, always discreetly, with an eye on a larger goal. He knew that beyond the hotel's success, this would be the ultimate way to show Mr. Brown that he had been underestimated, to turn the tables and take control of the destiny that had once been denied to him. As the expansion project advanced, Ethan focused on the present, on Aurora's growth, and on each new challenge he faced. But he knew that the time to execute his plan regarding the bank was drawing near. He waited patiently, understanding that the best revenge wasn't rushed. It was like Aurora's walls, rebuilt carefully, rising brick by brick until they stood unshakable. The decision to expand the Aurora Hotel was taking shape, and for Ethan, this new phase represented progress both in his career and in his commitment to Mr. Walker's legacy. The first location outside of town was in the planning stages, and he knew that the responsibility of keeping Aurora's essence alive in a new place would be a true test of his skill and vision. Ethan chose a charming town just a few hours away, known for its tourism appeal and rich cultural heritage. He spent weeks traveling there, exploring the area and speaking with local business owners and residents to understand the region's unique character. Just like the original Aurora, he wanted the new hotel to blend seamlessly into its surroundings, carrying the spirit and tradition of Aurora while adapting to the city's cultural context. At the same time, his plan regarding the bank continued to advance. Since the hotel's reopening, he had been purchasing small amounts of stock in the bank where Mr. Brown still held his position. Over time, these shares accumulated significantly, and now Ethan was beginning to consolidate his status as a major shareholder. Each purchase was made with strategy and discretion, as he wanted his move to be revealed only at the right moment, when he held enough influence to effect real change. For Ethan, these acquisitions were more than just a financial investment. They represented a calculated response, a way to overturn the rejection he and Mr. Walker had faced from Mr. Brown. By gaining influence within the bank, Ethan knew he would be putting himself in a position to directly confront the man who had so greatly underestimated the potential of Aurora. With each new share purchase, Ethan's plan became more concrete. He kept the process a secret, sharing the details only with Henry, who had been his greatest ally and advisor since the beginning of Aurora's reconstruction. Henry, who already held deep respect for Ethan, admired his friend's strategy, recognizing a skill and determination that few would possess. Ethan's silent, meticulous form of revenge was something Henry wholeheartedly supported, knowing how much it meant to the hotel owner. Meanwhile, preparations for the opening of the new Aurora location were well underway. The choice of building was deliberate. Ethan selected a historic structure that echoed the classic architecture of the original Aurora. Though in need of repairs, the building exuded a quiet grandeur that perfectly embodied the message he wanted the Aurora brand to convey. He knew the adaptation and renovation process would require a significant investment, but he was determined to move forward. The team he assembled for the new project included James Howard, the architect who had worked on restoring the original Aurora. Together, they devised a plan to preserve the building's historic charm while incorporating the new standards of quality and modernity Ethan had established for the hotel. The work was complex, and Ethan knew he'd have to balance his time between the new location and the original Aurora, which continued to demand his constant attention. As time went on, progress on the new location and his acquisition of bank shares advanced side by side. Ethan was always focused on the smallest details, whether it was constructing a new suite at Aurora or negotiating another batch of shares. He put the same energy and care into both projects, knowing each represented an essential part of his larger vision. Then, on a particularly busy afternoon, Ethan received news that would accelerate his plans with the bank. An important shareholder meeting had been called to discuss leadership succession, including Mr. Brown's position. Ethan saw this as a unique opportunity, a chance to intervene directly and finally assume the control he desired. He and Henry began working on a strategy to ensure that Ethan could attend the meeting as a significant shareholder, demonstrating to the other board members that his involvement with the bank was not merely symbolic but an essential part of his vision for the institution's future. Ethan didn't just want to remove Mr. Brown from his position. He wanted to prove that Aurora was an integral part of the community and that the bank's initial dismissal had been a grave mistake. At the meeting, Ethan entered discreetly, but his presence was immediately noticed by Mr. Brown, who seemed visibly uncomfortable to see him there. The meeting began with a formal discussion on finances and growth plans, and Ethan waited patiently for the right moment to make his move. When it was time for shareholders to share their thoughts, he stood up and, with a calm and confident voice, expressed his perspective. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I am here not only as a recent shareholder but as someone who was directly impacted by this bank's past decisions. Many of you are aware of what happened with the Aurora Hotel and its former owner, Mr. Walker. The denial of the loan was a misjudgment that cost not only him but the entire community that relied on that hotel. Today, Aurora has been reborn and stands as a symbol of resilience for the town. And I believe this institution needs a new direction, one that understands the value of supporting local ventures and investing in people and projects that truly matter. Ethan's statement was met with immediate silence. He knew his words were direct, but he also knew there was no better opportunity to bring up the impact of the bank's past refusal. His suggestion for new leadership, though implicit, clearly hinted at the need for change in management, and the other shareholders began whispering among themselves, considering what Ethan had just said. Mr. Brown, visibly unsettled, tried to respond, but his voice shook as he attempted to justify his past decisions. He realized that Ethan's influence was now too strong to ignore. Following Ethan's statement, the vote for succession was held, and to everyone's surprise, Mr. Brown was removed from his position, replaced by a new leadership team that committed to supporting local ventures more meaningfully. Ethan showed no visible satisfaction, but he felt that his mission was finally complete. His revenge had been quiet but powerful, and he knew that the impact of his presence and words at that meeting would linger in the minds of everyone present. Ethan had emerged victorious, proving to himself and to Mr. Walker that the hotel and its legacy would never be underestimated again. With the new Aurora location nearing completion and the bank under fresh leadership, Ethan felt he was finally free of the shadows of the past. He had not only fulfilled the promise he'd made to his former boss, but had also taken a decisive step to ensure that the Aurora name would be remembered as a symbol of perseverance and resilience. And most importantly, he knew the hotel's future was secure and prosperous, ready to continue its story in new cities and touch the hearts of those who cherished stories of overcoming adversity. The months that had passed after Hotel Aurora's expansion had brought Ethan a blend of accomplishments and reflections. The hotel thrived, extending to other cities and gaining the admiration of new guests. For him, each Aurora unit was an extension of the commitment he had made to Mr. Walker. Yet amid this success, a certain thought began to re-emerge. The memory of the anonymous support he had received shortly after the fire occupied his mind with unusual insistence. Ethan had always known that without that unexpected donation, taking the first steps toward rebuilding the hotel would have been impossible. Until now, he had allowed himself only to feel gratitude for the mysterious benefactor, never lingering on who might have placed such trust in his work and in the future of Aurora. One afternoon, while walking through the original Aurora, Ethan found Claire Thompson, the new manager of the unit, organizing a commemorative event in the main hall. The two talked about the hotel's impact on people, and during the conversation, Ethan mentioned the significance of that anonymous donation. "I've always known Aurora had the potential to rise again, but there was a moment when hope was all that was left. The anonymous donation we received, well, it's what made all of this possible," Ethan said, his expression a mixture of gratitude and nostalgia. "I'd like to know who believed in Aurora and gave me the chance to keep that promise." Claire listened attentively, realizing how important that memory was to him. She suggested that he might try to find answers, saying that acknowledging such a gesture might bring Ethan even more peace now that the hotel had become everything he had dreamed of. The idea grew in Ethan's mind, and he decided it was worth investigating the past. He recalled how the donation arrived discreetly, without any clear clues about the donor's identity. As he sifted through old documents and financial records from that time, he found no names or direct traces, only vague references to the amount and the timing of the deposit. This silence around the benefactor's identity intrigued him. He began to wonder why someone would choose to remain anonymous after making such a significant contribution. Over the following weeks, Ethan discreetly asked Mr. Walker's old friends and business partners about the period following the fire. Perhaps one of them knew of someone interested in Aurora, someone who trusted the hotel's value and had the resources to help. However, the stories he heard were vague and unrevealing. He even asked Henry Matthews, his partner and advisor throughout the expansion, if he had ever heard anything about the donation. "I never knew who it was, Ethan, but I remember hearing about the gesture. I was told the donation came from someone in the financial sector. But you know how these rumors are." "No one was sure," Henry said thoughtfully, leaving Ethan with more questions than answers. Ethan weighed Henry's words with a mix of curiosity and doubt. The financial sector? A donor linked to the bank? Could someone, even outside the hotel's immediate circle, have seen value in Aurora? He tried to recall details from that period, and almost involuntarily, the image of Mr. Brown surfaced in his mind. The bank manager, who had been an obstacle at the time, was the last person Ethan would associate with an act of generosity. He recalled how Mr. Brown had denied the loan request without even considering it further. The idea that someone in the bank might have anonymously contributed, contrasting with Mr. Brown's stance, left Ethan perplexed. The possibility seemed too absurd, yet the thought lingered. For now, Ethan set aside any focus on Mr. Brown, trying to find other explanations for the financial support he had received. But somehow, the mystery of the anonymous benefactor began to take up more space in his thoughts, becoming an essential piece of the puzzle he was determined to solve. In time, Ethan realized that this search for the past was about more than just gratitude. It was also a way to understand what truly motivated Aurora's rebirth and the role others had played in that journey. Even without clear answers, he committed to continuing his investigation, believing that this discovery could bring a new layer of meaning to his story and to Aurora's legacy. With the mystery of the anonymous donation now firmly in his mind, Ethan devoted himself more intently to the investigation. Even with the Hotel Aurora's expansion and the coordination of the new locations, he felt that uncovering the identity of whoever believed in Aurora at that critical moment was a personal matter. Somehow, he felt that understanding this gesture could add a new layer of significance to everything he and Mr. Walker had built. He started questioning some of the hotel's old partners, seeking any detail that might reveal the donation's origin. However, the answers remained the same: silence or vague rumors about someone from the financial sector who might have had ties to the bank. Intrigued, Ethan decided to broaden his investigation, revisiting old records and looking for any connection that might have gone unnoticed. In a conversation with Claire, he shared his progress, explaining the limited discoveries and the rumors circulating at the time. Claire listened intently, recognizing the weight this search held for Ethan. "Have you considered that the donor might be someone we know? Sometimes those closest to us see things we don't always realize," said Claire, suggesting that Ethan reflect on people who may have been supportive but chose anonymity for a reason. Claire's words left Ethan pensive, especially because part of his mind kept returning, stubbornly, to Mr. Brown. He recalled the bank manager's cold refusal, which had deeply affected him. Yet, something inside him nudged him to consider that perhaps that coldness wasn't the full picture of Mr. Brown, an idea he struggled to accept. Determined to get more direct answers, Ethan reached out to some old contacts at the bank, former colleagues of Mr. Brown. During one of these conversations, he learned that Mr. Brown hadn't been entirely indifferent to Aurora's situation after the fire. On the contrary, he had, albeit discreetly, expressed a certain admiration for the legacy the hotel represented in the city. This news surprised Ethan, as it conflicted with his perception of Mr. Brown as a purely rational, calculative person. These revelations stirred mixed feelings in Ethan. He felt a kind of discomfort at realizing he may have judged the bank manager prematurely. At the same time, he remembered the suffering and struggles he endured after the bank's refusal, and the resentment he had harbored for years. The possibility that Mr. Brown had acted with solidarity and compassion seemed incompatible with the image Ethan had built in his mind. Yet, the mystery of the anonymous donor now seemed closer to a resolution, one that might completely alter Ethan's view of the past. As Ethan reflects on all of this, he realizes that if the truth comes to light, he will have to confront his own beliefs and judgments about Mr. Brown. This thought deeply unsettles him, but he commits to continuing his investigation. After all, it wasn't just about satisfying his curiosity, it was about clarifying a crucial part of the Aurora's story. Days pass, and Ethan feels he is nearing a revelation. He finds himself recalling moments when Mr. Brown had been particularly rigid, and the idea that this same man could have been the secret benefactor challenges his understanding. The conflict between his old anger and the potential for newfound gratitude confuses his emotions, but Ethan knows that the path to the truth can be full of contradictions. As the mystery deepens, Ethan feels his notions of justice and revenge being tested. He starts to realize that perhaps the Aurora's legacy is also about seeing beyond appearances and finding value in motives that aren't always visible. Ethan's search leads him into a new phase of reflection, where what he has always believed may be about to change. Even without all the answers yet, he senses that both Aurora and his own perspective are about to gain new insight into what it means to trust, forgive, and recognize the true worth of those around him. Ethan's investigation has brought him to a point of no return. The clues he's found, along with the rumors of someone from the financial sector, increasingly point to a name he hesitates to accept: Mr. Brown. Despite all the evidence suggesting the unexpected generosity of the bank manager, Ethan struggles to believe that the man who denied the loan could be the same one who, in the shadows, provided the help needed for Aurora's rebirth. As the days go on, Ethan realizes this investigation is no longer just about gratitude. Discovering the donor's identity and confirming if it really is Mr. Brown would mean confronting a part of himself he had always kept untouched, the certainty of knowing who stood by him and who stood against him. After all, Mr. Brown's denial had shaped him profoundly, fueling his drive for success as a form of revenge. Finally, one afternoon, he decides to seek a direct conversation with Mr. Brown. There is no more room for doubts or hesitation. Instead of speculating, Ethan needs answers, and only the bank manager himself can provide them. He walks into the bank with calm determination and asks to speak with Mr. Brown privately. Upon entering the office, Ethan is greeted by a wary look. Mr. Brown appears uncomfortable with the unexpected visit but maintains a reserved and professional demeanor. Ethan, in turn, feels the weight of their history, of the memories and emotions he has harbored for so long. After a moment of silence, Ethan finally breaks the ice. I came here because, despite everything we've achieved with Aurora, there's a piece of this story that remains unresolved. I need to know if it was you who made that anonymous donation. The donation that saved the hotel after the fire. Mr. Brown's expression changes. He leans forward slightly, as if carefully considering his response. For the first time, Ethan sees a vulnerability he never imagined in the man he had despised for so long. In a quiet, almost whispering tone, Mr. Brown confirms. Yes, it was me. Ethan feels the ground disappear beneath him. The confirmation brings a surge of conflicting emotions. Anger, confusion, and, above all, a bewilderment he can barely express. The truth is painful because it dismantles the image he has built of Mr. Brown over the years. This man, whom he had devoted so much hostility toward, was, in fact, the person who had believed in Aurora's potential when no one else had. Confused and hesitant, Ethan asks, "But why? If you believed in Aurora, why deny the loan to Mr. Walker? Why choose to help from the shadows?" Mr. Brown sighs deeply, his expression a mixture of regret and calm. Refusing the loan was a decision imposed by the bank's policies, Ethan. The rules were clear and strict. Any loan for a property like Aurora, without sufficient guarantees, was considered too high a risk. But even so, I always admired what Mr. Walker did for the hotel and for the city. I knew how much Aurora meant to him, and to you. Ethan remains silent, absorbing the words. Mr. Brown's admiration for Aurora was genuine, yet the man had chosen an indirect path to help, keeping his distance while ensuring the hotel had a chance to survive. I understand that, to you, it may seem contradictory, Mr. Brown continues. But I truly believed that Aurora needed to exist. And I thought that by staying anonymous, I could help without interfering directly. The decision was mine, and it was the only way I found to do my part without compromising my position. Mr. Brown's words bring a new understanding to Ethan. He realizes that, distant as he seemed, the bank manager had acted in support of Aurora in the only way he believed possible. The resentment Ethan had carried until now begins to dissolve, replaced by a painful reflection. He had judged Mr. Brown as cold and indifferent, but now he saw that the man had shown compassion in the way he could, given his own limitations. A sense of guilt settles over Ethan. He feels as though he has been chasing a ghost, a distorted image of the man who, in reality, had been his greatest ally during the hardest times. With a mix of sadness and gratitude, Ethan turns to Mr. Brown one last time. "I never imagined. I spent years seeing you as the man who abandoned us. And now I see that it was quite the opposite. Thank you, Mr. Brown. I'm sorry for judging you so harshly." Mr. Brown nods, accepting Ethan's words with a calmness that suggests he had always known about the resentment but accepted it as the price of keeping his help a secret. For him, the important thing was that Aurora had survived, regardless of personal perceptions. Ethan leaves the bank in silence, his mind and heart filled with a new perspective. Everything he had built with the hotel and the accomplishments he held dear now took on a deeper meaning. The truth about the anonymous donor not only reshaped his perception of Mr. Brown but also transformed his understanding of forgiveness, generosity, and the complex motivations people often carry. After his conversation with Mr. Brown, Ethan felt as if the weight of the past, the anxieties and resentments he had carried, had finally lifted. The revelation that Mr. Brown was indeed the anonymous benefactor shook everything he believed about revenge and justice. For years, Ethan had harbored a desire to prove to the banker that Aurora was worthy of investment, but now he understood that this act of kindness had been carried out in secret by the same man he had pursued and resented. Returning to the original Aurora, Ethan spent a sleepless night reflecting on this revelation. Sitting in the lobby, with his heart both heavy and light, he thought about every decision he had made. The hotel was thriving, now as a prestigious chain attracting guests from various regions. However, he realized that the true triumph was not the expansion but the meaning behind each Aurora property, a symbol of resilience, memory, and faith in something greater. The next morning, Ethan decides it's time to share the truth with Claire and his closest team members. He knows he can't carry this story alone, feeling that this revelation is a significant part of Aurora's legacy, something future generations of leaders and staff should understand. Gathered in the hotel lobby, Ethan recounts, for the first time, the story of the anonymous donation and his recent discovery about Mr. Brown. As he narrates the story, he feels the weight of his words and notices the emotional impact this truth has on the team. Claire, always attuned to human motivations, seems to grasp the depth of Mr. Brown's gesture and the lesson it carries. Mr. Brown acted silently because, in his own way, he saw something worth preserving in Aurora. And I spent years harboring anger against him when, in fact, he was the reason the hotel could continue. This story, it taught me that we often can't see people's true motives, but we need to learn to look beyond what seems obvious. The team listens with respect and admiration, and Ethan feels that the Aurora story is now complete, carrying a message of forgiveness and understanding. The truth about the anonymous benefactor, once kept secret, now serves as a lesson in humility and growth for everyone involved. In the days that follow, Ethan writes a letter of gratitude to Mr. Brown, sincerely expressing how much the anonymous support had meant to him and to Mr. Walker's legacy. He acknowledges in the letter that he was wrong to judge Mr. Brown and thanks him for being a silent pillar for Aurora. The letter is sent to the bank, and with this final gesture, Ethan feels that the chapter of his story with the banker has come full circle. As time goes on, the Hotel Aurora continues to flourish as a respected destination, known for its classic charm and genuine hospitality. Ethan feels he has fulfilled his promise to Mr. Walker in ways he never imagined. The new Aurora locations receive praise for their elegance, respect for local history, and unique guest experience. For Ethan, each detail carries the mark of something built with sacrifice, passion, and, above all, resilience. Ethan now reflects on everything Aurora represents, not just a hotel, but a web of stories and interconnected lives, where each person who passes through its doors leaves their own mark. He realizes that his quest for vengeance transformed into a journey of self-discovery and growth. Aurora is truly a place of refuge, where the stories of guests, staff, and partners connect and contribute to something greater. On a quiet afternoon, sitting in the main hall of the original Aurora, Ethan contemplates the past and future. He knows the hotel will continue to grow and prosper, but to him, Aurora's true legacy lies in its ability to touch people's hearts and transform the lives of everyone who crosses its doors. Ethan now sees the hotel's success not just in bookings and praise, but in the genuine connections and deep lessons that Aurora provides. Finally, Ethan acknowledges that Mr. Brown was not a villain in his story but a quiet ally who believed in the value of the hotel in a way he hadn't understood at the time. With this realization, he sees that Aurora also represents a lesson in empathy and forgiveness, recognizing that each person has their own battles and limitations, and that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness come from the least expected places. As he leaves the Aurora that afternoon, Ethan feels at peace, knowing that the hotel and Mr. Walker's legacy will live on. And with one last look at the name Hotel Aurora at the entrance, he smiles, his heart now filled with gratitude and pride for what he built and the journey he took to get there. Months have passed since Ethan discovered the truth about the anonymous donor, and the peace this revelation brought to his life has been transformative. Hotel Aurora, now with locations spread across different cities, remains true to the vision of hospitality and authenticity that he and Mr. Walker always cherished. In each location, the attention to the guest experience and respect for local stories reflect Ethan's commitment to a legacy that goes beyond himself. One afternoon, on a visit to the original Aurora location, Ethan finds the hotel more vibrant than ever. Guests come and go, smiles on their faces and looks of admiration for the classic architecture and details that pay homage to the past. He walks through the lobby, watching the staff carry out their roles with dedication, and sees in each of them the continuation of what began with Mr. Walker, a promise to keep Aurora's spirit alive. Passing by Mr. Walker's old office, now filled with mementos and photos of the hotel over the years, Ethan feels a wave of emotion. He recalls the sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and the pain of the fire that almost destroyed everything he and Mr. Walker had built. But at the same time, he remembers Mr. Brown's support, the commitment of the staff, and every person who contributed to Aurora's rebirth and success. For Ethan, the hotel's success was always more than financial. It was about the impact Aurora had on people's lives. Hearing stories from guests who found comfort, inspiration, and even a temporary home at the hotel, he knew that Aurora was fulfilling its true purpose. In a conversation with Claire, his successor and friend, Ethan shares his feelings about Aurora's legacy. When Mr. Walker entrusted the hotel to me, he gave me so much more than a job. He gave me a home, a purpose, and a reason to keep going. And now I see that Aurora isn't just ours, Claire. It belongs to everyone who has ever passed through these doors, every guest who found a place of refuge here, and every employee who dedicated themselves to preserving its essence. Claire smiles, moved by Ethan's words, and says, "I feel that every day, Ethan. And I know that Aurora will continue to be this special refuge for generations to come. Thank you for showing us the way." With those words, Ethan feels that his role at Aurora is finally complete. He watches the hotel thrive, knowing that his legacy is safe in the hands of Claire and the other leaders who, like him, understand Aurora's value and meaning. That night, as he walks the streets of the city, Ethan finds peace in the simplicity of the moment. He allows himself to reflect on his journey and the many lessons the hotel taught him about friendship, perseverance, empathy, and forgiveness. He realizes that his desire for revenge against Mr. Brown was, in the end, a reflection of his own pain and insecurities. But now he understands that true greatness lies in recognizing the good where he least expected it and accepting the support he was given, even if it was in the shadows. In the weeks that follow, Ethan takes an even bigger step. He writes a book about the history of Hotel Aurora, a story that not only celebrates the hotel's success but also tells of Mr. Walker, Mr. Brown, and the journey that led to Aurora's rebirth. In the book, Ethan shares his own flaws, moments of doubt, and the revelations that led him to see the hotel's true essence. The book launch is met with enthusiasm from the city and guests from all over. People who have stayed at the Aurora share their stories of special moments at the hotel, and many find inspiration in the lessons of resilience and compassion that Ethan has written with such honesty. For him, the book's publication is the perfect conclusion, a tribute not only to the Aurora but to everyone who made this journey possible. Ethan feels his mission is complete. He steps back from the hotel's daily operations, trusting fully in the team he has built and in Claire, who now leads with the same dedication and love he devoted to the Aurora for so many years. Ethan knows that, under Claire's leadership and with the guidance of the new team, the hotel will continue to be a haven for all who seek more than just a place to stay. At a farewell ceremony organized by the Aurora staff, Ethan gives his final speech. With a voice full of emotion, he thanks everyone who has supported him, recalls Mr. Walker's legacy, and reflects on the importance of every person who has been part of the hotel's story. Hotel Aurora is a story of lives intertwined, of hearts that meet, and of moments that become timeless. Thank you to each of you, who are the true soul of this place. Aurora is a dream that began with Mr. Walker and will continue to grow, always with the same commitment to welcome, to care, and to transform lives. The applause is warm, and Ethan feels that the circle is finally complete. He leaves the hotel with a light heart, knowing that his legacy is not only secure but will live on in the memories, experiences, and hearts of everyone who passes through the Aurora. If you love stories that touch the heart and surprise you with every chapter, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Here, we're dedicated to bringing you new content every day, pouring passion into each story we create. Every subscription makes a huge difference and helps us continue bringing more chapters from the city of Velmer. So, if you'd like to support us and keep these stories coming, hit that subscribe button and join this adventure. Thank you for being part of our community, and we'll see you in the next video.